All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
We are Lawbogadas back for another episode. I am Connie Pena. I am a licensed attorney in the state of Florida, helping families transition in their family court cases as well as their family-based immigration matters.
And I am Missy Duarte, your co-host and your favorite Dominican American attorney, Mama. I'm licensed in New Jersey and Florida. I work out of Hackensack, New Jersey, and I specialize in personal injury. I represent accident victims that were harmed as a result of negligence of another person or perhaps an entity. So we're back for another episode.
We are
Thanks
back.
for
We
coming.
are we are Lawbogadas. We are two lawyers, Latinas, moms. We're on a mission to bring awareness and perspective to our listeners. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about Alec Baldwin, his arrest after the death or the killing of Miss Hutchins, who was a cinematographer on a movie set.
Yeah.
Let me give a quick summary of what happened, and we can, get right into this and how it's relevant to our listeners.
I mean, before we even jump into the topic, I mean, look, this is a pretty high profile situation. And before we even jump
Yes.
into what happened to Mr. Baldwin, I mean, let us just pay respect to the Hutchins family for the tragic death of their daughter, beloved family member, and any of her loved ones as well. So we don't want to make light of that. Take that very seriously. What happened here is very, very serious and very, very sad. So we
Yes.
pay our respects to the family and her friends in this really, really difficult time and in their time
Yes.
of need. But yeah,
Yes.
let's go ahead and hop in.
Yes. And, this all happened in October of 2021. Okay. So Miss Hutchins was a cinematographer on this movie set. And Alec Baldwin is not only an actor, but a producer. And so something happened where there was a prop gun. It had live ammunition in it. The gun was pointed and she was shot and she was killed.
Right.
And like Missy said, I can't believe what the family's going through, right? Like you find out your daughter, your sister, your friend, went to work and now this happened. And so now we're dealing with the public part of it, right? Because Alec Baldwin is a famous actor, and how he's been charged criminally for this incident that happened in October of 2021. He got charged now, January 2023, over a year later. The actual charges are 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Why it's two is because one of them is for the handling of the gun itself. And the second is for failing to make sure the gun and the ammunition were properly checked. So that's kind of the basics of the case in and of itself. Missy, why
Yes.
don't you tell me some other issues that you can see involved in this whole situation?
Well, it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to it based off what we know. So this was in the middle of rehearsing a scene where the gun was being used and was loaded. There's the issue of, while this is happening, there's also on staff the armorer that was responsible for overseeing the safety of the firearms, which that's been identified as Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who's also charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter as it relates to this particular case. But there's a number of issues that come up, but when you're talking about involuntary manslaughter, you're talking about a situation where somebody unintentionally but still unlawfully kills another person,
Right.
right? So how do the facts of the case fit into the elements required, the requisite to fit the requisite elements of this particular case? So, the prosecutor holds the burden of proof. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, the accused person, either acted recklessly or they acted with criminal negligence. So, with that, what you have to prove when it comes to recklessly, or to prove that someone acted recklessly, you have to show that the accused was aware of the risk that they were creating with their actions. And when it comes to criminal negligence, that's a contrast to recklessly. You have to show that the defendant, although not aware of the risk, but a reasonable person in that position would have been aware of the risk. So, you know, on its face, you're like, how could he possibly be charged? You know, he's an actor. They are on a movie set.
Right.
How is it that he could possibly be criminally liable for something so tragic as this? Well, but my question is, you're on a movie set, right? Like this is all fictional,
Right.
right? We're not live on scene in the middle of a shooting. Like how? Why were there real bullets? Why is there real live ammo on set? How did it get, if we're talking about a rehearsal, you know, why is live ammo being put into, why is it being used, period? Why is it on
How did
set?
right? How did this
How
how
did
did
it
this
get
get there?
there?
Who's
Uh,
responsible for that, right? Because there's these other issues and these other factors that we have to look into with this whole recklessly versus criminal negligence versus intentional or just a full-blown accident, right? Because there could be a situation that this is not it, but Alec Baldwin is just an actor who has no knowledge or control over anything and just picks something up as he's instructed to do in the script and it
right,
goes off, right? But
right,
we know that he's not just an actor, he's a
mm-hmm,
producer,
right.
right? And how you were saying, how did this ammo get on set? Why is it there? And apparently there were prior safety complaints on set that Baldwin in particular failed to deal with prior to this incident,
Well,
right?
yes, and that's part of his defense. He is alleging that he did not possess knowledge or he did not know that there were actual bullets in the or live, you know, real actual ammo in the particular gun that they were handling. It wasn't a prop gun, obviously. And I always remember this like class initially on its face when I heard this. I remember that classic like MBE, you know, when you take the bar exam. This was one of those questions on the bar exam, or at least during prep. This is one of those situations that came up. So I'm like, how could you possibly charge him? Like, what other facts? There has to be additional facts to support this, because you know, prosecutors have a duty and responsibility to charge people that they genuinely, they have to have probable cause. There's certain requisite requirements that they need in order to proceed on a criminal case. So I'm like, there's a lot more to this than just the classic, you know, bar exam question.
Right.
And you know, part of the evidence, we don't have everything in this particular case. He was just recently charged as of January, and you know, we're talking about this in February of 2023. Based off what we know, there was certain training that was undergone or in preparation for the filming of this particular movie that was supposed to take place. My understanding is the training was supposed to last like an hour. There's allegations that you know, Mr. Baldwin was only taking about 30 minutes, was on his phone during training, and there's other things that are being alleged to support, you know, the prosecution's case in this particular situation.
And I
In
think
addition to,
also, sorry, Missy, to interrupt you. I think also with what you're saying too, I did read that there was an issue with him pointing the gun in general, which goes to the training, right?
correct, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the pointing of the weapon was an issue, not necessarily supposed to do that. I took, you know, myself, I've been maybe took one or two firearms training, and that's the rule number one. You don't point it at anybody. Unless, you know, there's something else going on. But rule number one, it's not being pointed. And the times that I was in, you know, engaging in those types of activities, you know, you're at a shooting range, so it's a completely different scenario. But the same is true here. The same safety concerns apply here for good reason, because you do not want to inadvertently or by accident, or, you know, in this case, did you recklessly or act criminally negligent in respect to, you know, the fatality of somebody.
Right. And with that too, you know, there's this, let's kind of get into this criminal discussion,
Yeah,
right? The first thing we think is, damn, that's crazy, right? This was an accident, you know, in the criminal world, and again, this varies from state to state, um, an accident can be criminal, right?
right.
So, you know, I think the most common thing that people think of are DUIs are accident where someone can die, right? You did not intend to kill a person when you got in the car when you had too much to drink,
Right,
but is it reasonably foreseeable that that could happen,
right,
right? You know, other things happen sometimes with you know, when we hear about these cases where kids have access to guns, you know, where did you have them in the house? It's reasonably foreseeable to believe that a child might get access to it. These are things that are simply looked at in a simple way, a simple accident, but really there's the foreseeability in what makes it criminal. Wouldn't you agree?
I know, absolutely. You hit it spot on. I literally have nothing else to add to that point. I mean, but there's
And
also, then you go into the question of like, should he have known? Could one have known? Like, how reasonably foreseeable was it? Now, like, what were the facts? What was going on leading to this rehearsal of this specific scene involving this gun? Who loaded the ammo? Where is the ammo kept?
right.
Where, are there prop guns that are used? Was the intention to have the ammo on set because of the effect of, the sound of the gun and, the impact that can have? Are you looking for like cinematic effect to it? But like, where was it stored? Where was it saved? Who had access to it? Who was responsible for loading the ammo? Who was responsible for the maintenance of the weapon? And that, based off what we know, is believed to have been Miss Hannah Gutierrez Reed. She's the armorer on set. So it does, I would imagine that the position of the defense for the Baldwin defense should be, or probably is that he didn't know, and it's the responsibility of the armorer on set. She's the expert on. That's why she's hired to be there. She has the responsibility to make sure that everybody is executing safety on scene, to avoid any type of accidents.
Correct. And, then we get into co-defendants and people pointing the finger at each other, which happens civilly as well. And so obviously everyone right now is focused on the criminal aspect because this, is recent. It just happened. And on its face, like we've said, seems like just a terrible accident. The criminal court or criminal charges, the purpose is to punish someone, right? To send them to potentially to jail, probation, whatever, that there's a million things that could happen. And they could go to jail very well if they were convicted, right?
Right, right.
And something that you were talking about with what are the facts? In order to know what the facts are, there has to be an investigation, right? And we said this happened over a year ago. So for over a year, there's been an investigation. We don't know when exactly the prosecution itself became involved, but we do know that there's been over a year from the time that this occurred to the time of the charge. So, Missy, you being someone who specializes in personal injury in these types of civil litigation cases, I want to do, some questions for you because I'm sure that everybody is wondering these things. So the first thing is we've all heard on TV, oh, I plead the fifth. You don't have to answer questions, right? But here we're not dealing with someone who just something happened, got, a police officer came on scene and there was an immediate criminal
Right.
investigation and an arrest, right? We're talking about
Right.
a years long investigation and incident. So, how can people protect themselves in this kind of situation? So, Missy, are you required to answer questions in these kinds of civil incidents, car accidents, these kinds of things that could potentially be used against you later?
Good question. I mean, I am, my expertise is limited to, the states that I'm barred in. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's certainly like not legal advice, but I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who's licensed in both New Jersey and Florida. So, I mean, you do have a responsibility to report to insurance what happened. You have a duty to report an accident in both states. I would imagine that is predominantly the majority, great majority. You have a duty to report it to the police. You have a duty to report it to insurance. Can these statements be used against you? One can assert that, because of the severity of this, like, of course, there's going to be litigation. So, that would be a statement taken for the purposes of litigation, and it could be considered some type of like work product, or at least that's the argument that could be made. Oftentimes in my cases, when I'm representing accident victims, I want that information. I'm entitled to that information. The defense every once in a while, the opposing counsel will assert, hey, that's privilege or that's in anticipation of litigation. And most times, look, in New Jersey, you have 2 years from the date of the accident to file a lawsuit. You have no way of knowing immediately on scene whether there is no litigation pending, nothing
Right.
has been filed. You have no idea what's been going on. Even as an aside, the accident in and of itself, I don't even consider that the case. It's not the case. That's part of the case. But we don't know that until further down the road. So, that is something I wouldn't say that would necessarily be used against you, but it's very much relevant to the case, both from a criminal perspective and a civil perspective. You're talking about one's present sense impression, which is, a fancy evidence word that we use, or an excited utterance, something that you were assuming that you contemporaneously report this from the scene or shortly thereafter. This is something that, typically when people get into accidents, or typically when something happens like this, is kind of volatile, and this kind of like sticks out in your mind. So there's ways to navigate that. But in general, like I want to get my hands on that. Yeah, I mean, depending on what you say, it can be, or it could be relevant to the case at hand.
Right. And then there would be a difference there with using it in the civil world versus using it in a criminal case, right? Because
Right.
we do have the ability to what's called plead the Fifth Amendment, to remain silent, etc. And that this cannot be held against you. And just previously doing criminal defense, which I no longer do here in Florida, most people don't know that the jury is not really even supposed to be told whether or not you asserted any type of privilege or refused to speak, because that can have a really negative connotation. But
Correct.
the atmosphere is completely different in the civil end, right?
Right. I mean, from a criminal perspective, it's not your duty to prove that you're not guilty. It's the prosecution's duty to prove that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. From, a civil perspective, my obligation as a plaintiff's attorney, the person representing the victim, I have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, whether or not the allegation is true. And that's typically synonymous, or the example that's typically used is when you're using the scales, and if it ever just slightly tips in your favor, then I get to proceed. I have to prove that there was a duty, that there was a breach of that duty, that there was causation, and as a result, there was damages as a result of that accident. So it's very much different, but very much, those facts are still applicable to both the criminal realm and the civil realm.
Right. Because at the end of the day, the facts are the facts, right? It's the difference is, are you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt
Yeah,
versus, the
by
scales,
a
like you're
preponderance of the
saying.
evidence.
Right.
Yeah,
And then what could happen? Are you going to pay out because you have a way of paying insurance, whatever? Um, or are you going to jail?
yeah.
Right. And
And just as a point of,
obviously,
mhm.
I was just going to say, obviously, going to jail is worse. I mean, obviously, having to pay a lot of money is bad, especially depending on your financial situation. But the idea generally is that nobody wants to go to jail, and that's why it's supposed to be harder to prove it, right?
Right, right.
So, Missy, if something bad, if somebody that's listening, something bad has happened to another person because of what they did, whether directly or indirectly, right? What would your immediate advice be to that person?
Talk to counsel. Seek some guidance. Um, get help, like at least understand like where you are or what your options are in that particular scenario. This isn't about being litigious. This isn't about like hiding, or I have nothing to hide. This is not about you. It's about how things can be perceived or how things can be interpreted. And you're entitled to representation in the United States, if you so choose. So don't wait until you're arrested or charged. Remember, this is over a year. This happened in 2021. We're now in the beginning of 2023, where somebody is now formally charged with an offense, or a criminal, allegedly committing a criminal offense. And I'm a proponent of, not waiting until too late. Because if you wait until you're charged, if you wait until you're arrested, and that's, further down the road, you don't know what could happen, and that could actually create some problems for you down the road when it comes to creating or building a defense.
Yeah, and I know that I personally have recommended to people that have come to me saying, "Oh, so and so said they're going to go, you know, file charges on me for something. What should I do?" Say you just speak to a criminal attorney in advance. You don't want to wait till the charges are filed. Maybe there's something that could be done in advance, something, there's a whole litany of things. Um, Perhaps there's evidence that even helps to support your case of why you shouldn't be in trouble, and it's going to be gone if nobody does anything about
I
it,
mean,
right?
evidence preservation is so major, especially on the civil end. So, we always talk about the civil end, oh, making money. Listen, when someone's been injured as a result of somebody else's negligence or whatever the standard that is being used, the only remedy that the law provides is compensation, is money damages. If you suffered, physical injury, if you have out-of-pocket medicals, lost wages, emotional trauma. That is the literal only remedy that the law provides to you from the civil perspective. So, putting that aside, evidence preservation is absolutely crucial when it comes to these cases. Oftentimes people want to wait until down the road, like, oh, we're coming up on the statute. There's a lot of information that could be on both sides,
Right.
both for the party that is charged, both for the plaintiff or defendant, whatever case, if you're talking about the criminal or the civil realm, there's information that needs to be preserved on both sides, or should be preserved and should be considered. If somebody comes to me, shortly after the accident, whenever it happens, the closer in time that it happens, the more of an ability I have to preserve evidence, to understand what happened. And sometimes, listen, sometimes it's helpful to the client and sometimes it's hurtful to the client. But in this day and age, evidence is like recordings and things like that is much more accessible. It's a lot easier to get your hands on these things. So my recommendation is always, the closer in time the better. And just be proactive, not reactive when it comes to these situations.
Exactly, because like you're saying, on both sides, once something is gone, it's gone. And even not just talking about documents or videos, right? There's also, was someone else there? Who is that person? How do I find this person now? What do they remember that day or that month versus 2 years later, right?
Right.
And so these are all the things that, for better or for worse, um, either, I mean, they're going to help one side. Someone's going to be
Yeah.
helped, and you don't know what that information is until you actually have it. And I think a big takeaway that I personally want people to know is what you discuss with an attorney is privileged. There is nothing, basically nothing, that can break that. So you going to see a lawyer the day after something happened, whether it was to you or by you, is not going to be known by other people, right?
Yeah.
And that conversation is confidential, it's privileged, it's sacred, because that's the only way you're going to know what you can or cannot do, or what you should do, or where to take things, now, right? It's such a
That
short relationship.
Yeah, and then I apologize for interrupting that. And if it's something very important, the fact that you even had a conversation, like the fact that you, as Joe Smith or whoever you are, walked into my office, that to me, that's privileged. I can't, if somebody calls and says, did so and so come to your office, like I can't admit or deny that. I'm not in the position to answer that question. That to me is a privileged act, and the mere act of you walking to my office almost already insinuates the fact that we had a conversation. So that to me, privilege to me encompasses a lot more than just the physical conversation.
Yeah, and I think one takeaway while we kind of wrap this up is, when you're looking for an attorney, is to, so that you feel comfortable and understand that this conversation is sacred, right? And that's one of the biggest parts of when you're looking for an attorney for whatever case it is having the time to find someone where you feel comfortable, where you feel heard, you feel understood, and you understand the practices and procedures that go into being a client of this firm or attorney. And so that's something that, why would you want to wait till someone's at your door to go online and figure out who you're going to call, when you may very well have had time to do it in advance? Not always, but
Yeah. And
sometimes you have the ability to do that.
as the victim of a situation like this, you want to talk to somebody ASAP. You want to preserve evidence. Aside from the evidence perspective, it is a very overwhelming process.
Oh,
For
of
some,
course.
an accident, an event like this is very tragic, and in my experience, it shakes my clients. it shakes their families. It is a complete, and this is an understatement, interruption in their life. Okay. It is a jolt. It is a shock. It just throws everything off track. You have to talk to insurance companies. You have to talk with investigators. You have to speak with insurance companies. There's so many things that need to be done
Right.
in these cases. And it's so overwhelming, especially if you have never been through this process before, on top of everything else, making arrangements for yourself, whether it's medical treatment or making, for funeral arrangements, God forbid. It is hard,
Oh yeah.
and you should really have somebody, if their specialty is in this area, to help you navigate these things, to help minimize the stress. That's what I feel is my obligation as a plaintiff's attorney when it comes to representing injured clients. I need to minimize that stress so that the family is able to move forward and get closure to the best of their ability. Okay. I always tell my clients, I want you to take care of getting better. My job is to take care of the rest. So it's not necessarily about being like litigious or, hiding things or creating or spinning things. It's really about like management and, realistically being able to get through a very difficult time.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the hardest things. And in this case we're talking about right now, the Hutchins family will never have this person back. She will never be back. There's no amount of money that can compensate this loss,
No,
realistically speaking,
no.
right? And so I think that this is one of the hardest types of cases, right? Where there's a fatality, where there's this level of a tragedy. Of course, being permanently disabled, all these things are horrendous, and I don't wish that upon anyone and can't even imagine going through that. But once the person is gone, they're gone, right? And yeah, these are really hard times for people. And on my end, where I'm dealing with families going through these changes, it's there's certain areas of law like yours and mine doing family law where it's very emotional. It's not just, oh, I want to get back at so and so because they did XYZ. It's a change in my life that I didn't necessarily want or,
Anticipate,
right? On your end, obviously, is different than mine. On my end, someone wanted something, but I think that at one point they wanted the same thing, right? You were together with this person and now you're not, and you didn't necessarily plan on that.
right.
So it's really hard. And, there's kids being injured and having children, and now how to take care of them, how to do all these things, going from being a married couple to being a single parent. There's a lot of changes, and having that support is really important. And so, here we are. But I think this has been a really good discussion. Um, and at the end of the day, the takeaway for me to everyone that's listening is whether you're a victim of something or you're accused or could potentially be accused of something, it's so important to contact an attorney to make sure that what needs to be done is done and that you're taken care of.
Yeah, understand your options, understand the resources available to you, and just understand, what potentially could occur down the road, and there's options potentially. So just, I'm always a proponent of, knowing the more that get educated on certain things. Oftentimes the best way is to, you know, avoid things or understand things better or minimize things,
Right.
is by empowering yourself and having somebody on your side that specializes in that area and that could protect you, and can minimize the stress in a very, very difficult time. So we want to thank you again for joining us today for another episode of Lawbogadas. Please follow us on Instagram at Lawbogadas. Would love to hear from you. Love for you guys to interact with us. And likewise, let us know what you want to hear. What other topics would you like to discuss? We want to thank everybody so far that's been following us, for the outpouring of support. There's been a lot of love for us. So I want to say thank you to our current followers and, our soon-to-be followers. We're excited to have you. Also email us at info@lawbogadas.com. That is LAWBOGADAS.com. And thanks again. Thanks for a wonderful episode, Connie.
Thanks, Missy. Again, we're Lawbogadas, two lawyers, Latinas, moms on a mission to bring you awareness and perspective. So we will catch you next time. Bye.
See you. Bye.